Welcome to the Dr. Carolyn Coker Ross Show, awakening your full potential and expanding your understanding of how to live fully and joyfully by making conscious choices that promote and maintain vitality in all areas of your life. Now here's your host, Dr. Carolyn Coker Ross. Please be sure to listen to this episode in an environment that is safe. Do not listen to this recording while driving a car or operating any kind of machinery.
Welcome to the Dr. Carolyn Coker Ross Show. Today, my guest is Michelle Lelwica, and Michelle is a professor of religion at Concordia College in Moorhead, Minnesota, where she teaches courses on the intersection of religion, gender, culture, and the body. And today we're going to be talking about kind of what women are really hungry for and why we're so obsessed about food and weight, and whether that's really a spiritual hunger. So to tell you a little bit more about Michelle, she did her graduate work at Harvard Divinity School, where she received a Master's of Theological Studies in Christianity and Culture and a Doctorate of Theology. So I should be calling you Dr. Lelwica, right?
Oh, please call me Michelle. That's totally fine.
And she's the author of 3 books, the most recent of which is Shameful Bodies, Religion, and the Culture of Physical Improvement. And then she has also this book, The Religion of Thinness, and one other book, Starving for Salvation, The Spiritual Dimensions of Eating Problems. So welcome to the show, Michelle. It's so great to have you.
Thank you so much for having me.
Yeah, so how did you first get interested in this topic? I mean, it's really unique niche under religion.
Yeah. When I was in graduate school and I told my dissertation advisor that I wanted to, and I went to graduate school, of course, in religion. And when I told her that I wanted to focus on eating problems and body image problems, her first response was, But, it didn't take long for her to start connecting the dots that I was already seeing between the historical attitudes towards women's bodies in the history of Christianity in particular. That was my focus because that's the tradition that's had the most power to influence the body norms and the cultural norms and the gender norms of American culture, which was my focus.
Okay, so let's just dive into that a little bit, because in your book you talk about how the religious patriarchy actually fostered this religion of thinness. So how did religion get into women's bodies?
Yeah. Well, historically, the focus on thinness, of course, is relatively new. I mean, when I think about the history of Christianity going back 2,000 years, religious patriarchy, so the male dominant leaders of the church, were not interested in keeping women thin, but they had other ways of trying to control women's bodies. Mm-hmm. And a lot of it started with perceptions.
Why did they want to control women's bodies? Was it the sinfulness that women's bodies provoked really in them, that they had in women?
The key thing that you just said is in them. Yeah. I think a lot of it was projection. Mm-hmm. And if we can just go right straight to the story of Eve.
Okay.
A story that was my epiphany once I started looking at that story in graduate school. Of course, I had grown up with that story. I was raised Catholic and understood, the story of Adam and Eve, could tell you about it by heart. But it was in graduate school when I was looking at, in the larger context, religious leaders, male leaders, attitudes towards women's bodies, that this story was something that especially the early church leaders returned to repeatedly again and again and again, as evidence for women's inferiority.
So the fact that Eve ate the apple made her weak?
Yeah. What's funny is most of us think of it as an apple because that's the artistic tradition. It's actually a piece of fruit. But yeah, the idea that what the church fathers say again and again, and this is just so many of them repeat the same story, that Satan never would have tempted Adam, but Satan went for the gullible, weaker, more sin-prone, more flesh-prone of the two, and that, of course, was Eve. The particular epiphany for me was starting to think about what Eve did to bring sin and shame into the world, right? So the first thing that, and as a religion scholar, I see this as a creation myth. Religion scholars don't think there was a person named Adam and Eve in some garden somewhere. We see this as a creation myth, right? But even so, the symbolism is so heavy when you recognize that it is the act of a woman eating that brings sin and death into the world.
Oh my gosh, I never really thought of it that way.
Think about the shame echoes of that.
Yeah, just
story.
eating,
Yeah,
the shameful. Yeah.
And eating, and it's the act that brings sin, not just sin, but shame and death into the world. That's the transgressive act, and it's a woman eating. And, I talk to my students, I teach college students, and so I talk to them about their sense of eating. Can you eat with freedom, or do you feel a sense of shame? They often, and these are women who are young and smart, and they have all kinds of goals, but they still, this sense of shame surrounds them in their relationship with food. And so I'm not saying that the authors of that creation myth had an intention of making women feel like they have to watch their weight or count calories. It's not like that, but it's just the symbolism of associating female appetite with shame and sin that became, for me, the epiphany that made me feel like, oh, we've got so much to uncover here in terms of the history of attitudes towards women's bodies in Western culture.
So how did it move a little further as history progressed from Eve into it being about thinness? And part of it, you say in your book, has to do with kind of the higher class women were expected to be thin in contradistinction to women who were more poor or from less financially up there backgrounds. I don't know how to say it.
Yeah, no, it's true. In the course of the 20th century, we've come to associate thinness with social privilege. Okay. So thinness gets associated, and we see this repeatedly through media images. Thinness gets associated with wealth. It's often associated with heteronormativity. I don't know if that's a word your listeners are familiar with. We use that in academics, right? The idea that most people are and should be heterosexual. And so the idea of the thin woman with the kind of beefed up man is part of that social privilege.
So let's talk a little bit about how the media does that. I know you pick apart some ads in your book, but can you just give us one that maybe people might have seen before that gives us that sense of why that's associated with privilege?
Well, it's funny. I try to really limit my consumption of media, and I don't watch TV very much. So it's hard for me to pull out an advertisement just off the top of my head. But we've all been exposed to, for example, with this new diet plan in just 4 weeks, you can become thin and happy. And then you're paying money for the diet plan or the fitness plan, or think of how many of the celebrities have personal trainers or eat caviar for lunch or whatever. The association is the more money you have, the more you can spend on perfecting your body. So I think it's not even just advertisements. I think it's within the celebrity culture that celebrities who have babies and then they lose all of their, quote, baby weight right away because they have these personal trainers and special diets and all of this money to spend on keeping their bodies perfect. So through that celebrity culture.
There's some also racial implications of that as well, because I speak a lot on African American women who have eating disorders and doing the historical research on that. White elite women were compared to Black women's bodies, and Black women's bodies were demonized and thought to be disgusting or shameful or whatever the terms were.
I'm completely happy you brought that up because I've been thinking this for so long. It's actually, I mentioned it in my first book, that thinness is a white ideal.
It's a white privilege.
It's a white privilege ideal. And then the implications of that, Carolyn, are so deep because when you think about it, then if you're a white woman and you're hardcore on getting the thinner, perfect body and you associate thinness with perfection, you are pursuing a white Western ideal that has a colonial history. And so indirectly, you may have the best of intentions of becoming healthier or more beautiful or whatever, but you're participating in a racist ideal. And white women need to really wake up to that. If nothing else, we need to disengage from this thinness mania because it's got racism in it.
Yeah, wow.
I'm so happy you brought that up.
That's a whole new cut. So in your book, you talk about the myth of thinness and whether it is a fact versus a socially fabricated fiction. And not just the media has perpetuated, but also the medical profession has perpetuated it. And, I was just talking to someone recently and talking about some of the shame that I have as a physician, having been educated that obesity, you can't equate that with health. You can't be healthy no matter what your size is. You have to lose weight. And even though I wasn't one of the worst purveyors, I never did put people on diet pills or went to extreme dieting. In my early parts of my career, I did feel that you had to lose weight to be healthy. And now I'm so clear that that is so wrong. And there is some regret that I actually was involved in that early in my career.
But there's also some beauty in your story of being willing to sort of grow professionally. You've grown beyond a limited knowledge and you've opened yourself to new perspectives. And, I talk about that myth. I actually think of it as a salvation myth. As a religion scholar, so I look at our culture and I see so many salvation myths. And I think of those myths as the promise of happiness and the promise of health.
You'll be saved if you're thin.
Yes.
Is what you're saying.
Yes, you will be saved. And the word salvation or saved etymologically means good health.
Oh, okay.
So the salvation of thinness is this idea that we will be healthy, we will be whole. Wholeness is another word for salvation. And so that myth has really, in its secular form, the salvation myth says you will be happier if you're thinner and you will be healthier if you're thinner.
And that is such a difficult myth to overcome.
We are fish in water.
Yeah, this is the work I do. I have a program where I work with people online to talk about how to actually get rid of their obsessions with food and to teach that they can be healthy at every size. But that particular thing, especially the link in their minds between weight and health, is the hardest one to move past.
And what's funny about it is, we know it's not true. We know that being healthy doesn't involve obsessing about every single little calorie or fat gram or getting every single moment you spend on the treadmill. Right. That health is much bigger than that. We know that intellectually, but I think you're right. It's so ingrained in us, and that message is so repeated and so widespread. So what tactics do you use to try to undo that message and loosen?
Well, as you know, that's a pretty in-depth. It's not any one thing. And that's the other problem that I face in my work is everybody's so conditioned to one solution. Okay, I'll just go on this diet and everything will be fine. And of course, it never is. And then there's 5 diets, 10 diets, 15 diets until I think women are starting to wake up a little bit to the fact that dieting doesn't work. But it's hard to wake up to the fact that obesity or weight obsession is complex. Part of it is that just women so believe in their hearts that they need to lose weight. It's like a heartfelt belief that's really hard for them to give up. So it takes quite a bit of time.
This goes back to what you were asking me about earlier with the historical church fathers. I think there's such a long history in religion, and religion just seeps right into culture. So it's in our cultural DNA, the history of viewing women's bodies as inadequate. If we've had not just centuries, but millennia of seeing women's bodies as flawed, as sinful, as somehow needing to be monitored, supervised, saved, we can't just flick a switch and change our minds about it. It takes a lot of conscious retraining and awareness of when those voices and those historical patterns of seeing our bodies as inferior or inadequate.
The culture is so strong around this issue that it makes it very difficult for women to buck the tide. Everyone's going in this direction to the next great fad diet, and all the hope of, I can lose weight and I'll finally be happy and healthy, and to be swimming against the tide is extremely difficult. So in your book, you also talk about the Christian diet movement. I didn't know about that.
It's
tell us a little bit about it.
Interesting. I discuss it in the context of just looking at the way that so much of our pursuit of thinness involves our sense of morality And the idea that thinner is not just healthier, not just more beautiful, but better in a moral way. So we talk about the thin body as a good body, and good is a moral term. Mm-hmm. So this is pervasive in culture, but it's crystallized this moralizing of thinness in the Christian diet movement, where you have lots of Christian diet authors or they're sort of evangelists for thinness, literally advocating that really God wants you thinner. God intended every body to be thin, and that if you are not thin, you are, in a sense, wearing your sin on your body, because your fatness or your extra weight is, in this paradigm of Christian dieting, is a sign of your idolatrous relationship with food, your inability to control or tame your sinful appetite.
That is so heavy.
It's very heavy, and it's very shaming.
Well, is it just Christianity that has done a number on women and their bodies, or is this pretty much across the board?
Well, the bad news is each tradition has its patriarchal parts. So each tradition, whether you're talking about Judaism or Islam or Hinduism or Buddhism, they all have messages that suggest that women are inferior beings, less capable of spirituality. I like to think of patriarchal religion as one side of every tradition, but it's not all of the tradition. I mean, there are plenty of Christian feminists, there are plenty of Jewish feminists and Hindu feminists and Buddhist and Muslim feminists who understand, they don't deny the patriarchal traditions that privilege men and favor male bodies and associate men with spirituality and women with carnality. They don't deny those patriarchal aspects, but they also find within the tradition empowering elements.
But does every tradition have this religion of thinness going on?
That's a hard question for me to answer because I haven't studied the other traditions in depth enough to make a comment. But I will say that there's fear of female bodies and fear of female appetites in all of the traditions.
Yeah.
Less so maybe less so in some of them, but certainly even in ancient Buddhism, there are texts that suggest that women's appetites are suspect.
Wow.
Yeah.
Why are men so afraid of women and their appetites?
That's such a great question, because when I ask students, we'll read these historical texts and the church fathers going on about women being so sin prone and carnally driven, where men are oriented by reason and rationality and spirit. And I'll ask students, well, what do these texts actually tell us about women? And they'll sort of think about it for a while, and eventually they realize they don't tell us anything about women. They tell us about men's fears.
Men's fears, all we're hearing about.
Yeah. Men's projected fears.
So say a little bit more about why women's obsession with food and with thinness is really a spiritual hunger.
Yeah. I think about spirituality as involving a sense of purpose. Mm-hmm. So maybe backing up a little bit, my own research is, I think this is true for a lot of us who work in this field, has roots in my own experience and historical experience of struggle with body image and an adolescent eating disorder. And when I think back to that experience and look at the stories of women I've studied, there's kind of a common thread of how the pursuit of thinness creates a sense of purpose. Yeah. And if that becomes your sense of purpose, in a sense, there's something that it's a kind of false sense of purpose because it doesn't really satisfy the need.
You can never fill that hunger that you have with food.
You'll never fill it with food, and you'll never fill it with thinness. And even people who are recovering from eating disorders will tell you that, even when I achieved my goal of thinness, I still felt that emptiness. And
I've had women describe it as being career dieters.
Oh, that term resonates.
Isn't that a great term?
What I've seen, yes. Yeah. And so what is the deeper needs behind the pursuit of thinness? So we think that being thin will make us happy. We think that being thin will make us healthier. We think that being thin will make us good and acceptable in the eyes of others. But what are the deeper needs? Because thinness is a superficial strategy for meeting those needs.
Yeah.
And I think of the self-loathing that many women direct towards themselves in their pursuit of thinness as a kind of spiritual crisis, because, and I'm not talking about spirituality as you have to believe in God, I'm talking about it as, where do you get meaning in your life?
Yeah.
And so if your primary source of meaning is pursuing thinness, that is a pretty bankrupt source of meaning. I think we need deeper sources of meaning to help us grow. If we don't want to stunt our own growth by having a superficial goal like thinness be the source of meaning for our life.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't want to sound judgmental about that. I have so much empathy because I've been there.
Yeah.
And our culture rewards women for being superficial. But think about all of the untapped power women have if we could stop being so superficial about things. And
that's exactly what I always say is, I often ask women, how much of your time and energy are you spending thinking about food and your body? And many times it can be 50 to 70 to 80%. And I just think, what a waste of female human capital.
Yes, I know. It's heartbreaking. And I wonder if we haven't been able to change the tide of the direction of this world because so much of our female energy has been hijacked.
It's hijacked and distracted over here.
Right.
So we can't grow personally. We can't grow creatively. We can't fulfill our potential really as humans.
Yeah. Well, it's funny that you say that because I think a turning point for me, even though I had stopped my eating disordered behavior by the time I went to college, and this was back in I went to college in 1982. So words like anorexia and bulimia were not widespread. But I had by that time stopped the behavior, but I still had what I call eating disorder mentality.
Yeah.
And it was really, honestly, when I was introduced to feminism that things changed for me and I had a very negative view of feminism prior to really making the connections. I thought it was I remember my college boyfriend asked me, what do you think about feminism? And I said, oh, that's for women with low self-esteem. Can you imagine? 3 years in the thick of a really bad eating disorder as a high school student, that's pretty low self-esteem. But anyway, once I started to understand why feminists were upset about the way women have been treated in society and how systemic the sexism is. Once I started to understand that, I realized for the first time that my negativity and my self-loathing and my self-hatred and my never good enough dictatorship I had going on with myself was not just an individual pathology. There was something bigger going on. And an epiphany came for me when I realized I was so sick of living in that prison of self-obsession. Mm-hmm. What I really wanted to do was change the world. Not my thighs,
Not your thighs.
Not my thighs, yeah. Because I had this big focus on I wanted to have thin thighs. I'm never going to have thin thighs. I was born with thick thighs. So that's okay. They're kind of voluptuous. But at the time, all I could think about was that was what I wanted to change. And so the spiritual epiphany for me was, no, I want to change the world. I want to participate in making this world a better place, not just making my body so-called better under somebody else's definition of better, really.
Yeah, someone else's definition, and one that's not even scientifically anchored.
No.
So one of the other things that caught my attention from your book is cultural criticism, because when the women I work with start to let go of that diet mentality, they're still in a sea.
Yes. Yeah.
Where diet mentality is the norm.
Yeah.
And in your book, you tell people how to deal with that. So can you just give us a brief synopsis?
Yeah. So cultural criticism, I actually think of it as a spiritual practice.
Yeah.
So it's basically looking and cultivating a critical awareness of the messages that you're being surrounded with. And a lot of this means paying attention to the media. And now that includes social media as well. I don't do social media, but my students do. And they tell me it's one of the most toxic environments for them comparing themselves to other people and berating themselves and feeling inadequate. So cultural criticism is looking at an image, for example, a popular image, or even a media icon, a celebrity or something, or an advertisement, and asking yourself, what's the message here? What's the real message I'm receiving? Mm-hmm. And to be aware of who's benefiting from that message. If it's a commercially produced message, probably somebody's making money. And oftentimes they're making money off of you feeling inadequate. So just learning to recognize those messages and how damaging they are, or recognizing if you're watching a television show, why are the women all about 20 years old, if they even have major parts, or are they just decorative objects? So learning to train yourself to see these kind of cliche scenarios in popular culture, that you can't even sell a car without having some kind of so-called beautiful woman who looks like a Barbie doll sitting in it.
Yeah.
You know, how are women's bodies used in popular culture?
And then I think also, how does it make you feel when
that
you
was
see
the
that?
next.
Oh,
Yeah.
okay.
Yeah, no, yeah, exactly. So how does that make you feel, and how am I internalizing that? And one of the assignments I do with my students is I sometimes take them to the local mall, you know, the shopping center. And after we've been reading about attitudes towards women's bodies, and I just tell them to walk around without talking, without having any conversation. I just want them to walk around and pay attention to the messages, whether it's the mannequins or the billboards or the verbal or visual messages. And I want them to also pay attention simultaneously to how they feel on the inside. And I have them do this as a kind of formal assignment because we're doing it all the time. Mm-hmm. We live in this culture where we're bombarded with images and messages all the time, but we're not conscious of being educated by those messages. Yeah. We think of them as entertainment.
Yeah, I remember recently that recognized that whenever I had a big consulting job or a big talk that I was going to give, that I have some anxiety, which is normal. That's okay. Mm-hmm. But I didn't notice the anxiety. What I noticed was right before a big talk, suddenly I felt the need that I had to go out shopping and buy a new outfit. Mm-hmm. You know, and spend hundreds of dollars, which I really didn't need to spend because of my anxiety. When I got in touch with the anxiety, then I could just deal with that. And, okay, you're anxious. You don't need a new outfit. You just need to deal with your anxiety.
That's so beautiful. I love that story because one of the things I've realized is because we live in such an image-saturated society, women and a lot of those images are directed towards women on how we should improve our bodies. We don't learn to notice what's actually happening on the inside. We experience our bodies as an image for other people to look at rather than checking in with how am I feeling on the inside. Right. So what I love about your story is like once you started checking in on the inside, what am I actually feeling here?
And what I was feeling is I needed to save money, not to not to cover up my anxiety by getting a new suit, you know, or something.
But what would happen if in the morning we woke up, you know, most of us wake up and we go and use the bathroom and then we take a pause in the mirror. And that's like our first interaction with ourselves.
Yeah.
What if we woke up in the morning and just sort of tuned into ourselves on the inside? You know, what's the weather like inside myself today? Is it sunny? Yeah. Are there some storms on the horizon? Am I foggy? So
I think that's wonderful because it keeps those emotions from sneaking up on you. And before you know it, you're overeating or binging or over shopping or whatever.
Yeah.
And checking in on the weather, the internal weather. I like that. So and the last question that I have for you is you talk about another spiritual practice, practice peace with our bodies. Is that how you put it? I think it's
peace with our bodies.
Peace with our bodies. Can you talk about how?
First, I want to give a shout out to an old friend of mine, Sissy Brady Rogers, who was the first person who introduced me to that idea of practicing peace with your body. We often use the idea of making peace with your body, but that makes it sound like it's just something you can do and then you're done, check that off.
Like a destination,
Yeah, but really, let's face it, in this culture, it has to be a journey because we can't quarantine ourselves from all these messages. So the idea of being at peace with your body is something we have to practice, especially as women. So it's an ongoing practice. I think it begins with cultivating that internal relationship with yourself. And this is, again, the spiritual dimension. How do we relate to ourselves? How do we examine what's happening and gain greater awareness of what's happening on the inside? And that is a practice that has to be repeated. I think of practice as something that you're training yourself to develop a new skill. We're developing new skills in how we relate to ourselves, how we relate to our bodies. If I want to relate to my body with greater friendliness, and I have a history of self-hatred, it's like of any pianist or any violinist, or, you know, we're going to have to do those scales again and again and again, or any athlete is going to have to do those reps again and again. We have to repeat it to develop new skills and unlearn the cultural conditioning that has made us feel bad about ourselves.
I think what's been so great about talking with you today is just giving not just what we see in the media, but also what's gone back 3,000 years to the story of Eve, and being able to see it's not just us who is struggling with this. This is generations of women. We're part of a league of women who have been minimized and desecrated and so on. And it's almost like you say, it's a feminist issue. And how are we going to teach our children, the next generation, to feel about their bodies if we don't start practicing peace with our body?
No, I love what you said there, just because I think the more we can see our own struggles in the context of this long history of the way women's bodies have been demeaned and treated negatively and controlled, the less we personalize that sense of shame. And that is, for me, the fundamental thing. How do we break free from that cycle of shame? And shame festers when we think it's my fault.
Absolutely.
But the more we see this broader cultural, historical, religious, all of this.
And the more we talk about it with each other.
Yes, exactly. The more we practice sisterhood, I think. Yeah. And, I think there are men out there, too, who want to have some freedom from the increasingly imprisoning norms that they're being affected by. So talking about it, recognizing it feels personal, but this is part of a larger struggle to reclaim our bodies from that history and the narratives that tell us that we're not good enough.
And to reclaim our own arc of our personal potential. Yeah. That arc that started when we were born and that we've been taken off of by this focus on thinness, and to reclaim that arc so that we can live up to our potential, no matter how much longer it takes.
Yeah, and I think that really involves having to face whatever suffering, whatever discomfort led us down this path of what I call the religion of thinness. What led us to become devoted, to devote our energy? Devotion is, again, a kind of religious-like word, but we devote ourselves to thinness. Why? And I think sometimes really it comes down to we're trying to find meaning in life. We're trying to find a way to deal with suffering. So if we don't find new sources of meaning, if we don't find new ways to deal with suffering, and if we don't find new ways to cultivate a different kind of awareness, we'll continue going down that path that doesn't provide the salvation it promises.
Exactly. Well, I want to leave on that note because, again, you say, what are women really hungry for? Women's obsession about food and weight is really a spiritual hunger. And I think if we can understand what the word spiritual means first, so everybody doesn't get triggered, but really focus on that inner work. Yeah. And how do we fill the hole with the inner work rather than something outside of us ourselves. It has been so exciting to talk to you. I would love to interview you again after I read your newest book, because I just think this is so needed in my field in particular, to really have people look at something besides just your behaviors.
Yeah. Well, I appreciate the work people like you are doing to help liberate women from that prison of thinking they need to be something different than they are.
Well, thank you so much. So we'll stay in touch, and I'll call you again to be on the show.
Thank you, Carolyn.
You have been listening to the Dr. Carolyn Coker Ross Show. Please visit carolynrossmd.com. That's carolynrossmd.com to access podcasts, show archives, and more about Dr. Ross and her services.